All right, everyone. Thank you all for joining here today. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I know we have folks joining us from all across the globe. So super excited to be talking to you here today about some of the core eTMF features and practices that anybody in the clinical trials space should be considering, right? So we have a really great kind of panelist lineup here today. And we're super excited to just share some knowledge with you and also answer any questions that you may have. So a couple of housekeeping pieces here before we get started. First and foremost, we are recording this session. You'll be able to find it on the CloudBiz website. In the next day or so, we'll be sending out a communication to all our registered attendees about that. Secondly, when it comes to questions, folks, we have enabled the Q&A feature on Zoom. So please feel free to send those questions in right to the panelists, and we will be answering them, if possible throughout the presentation, but also we will be reserving about 10 minutes or so at the end to do an actual Q&A. All right, so with that, let's get started. So Bernadette, could you please go to the next slide? All right, so here today, folks, this is the CloudBiz Lunch and Learn. We are here today to talk about core eTMF features and practices, as I mentioned, right? And we have our esteemed colleagues, Medha Datar and Resharp Mittal here with us. So next slide, please. So I'll quickly do, a high-level intro for the two, and then I'll pass the ball to them. But we're super excited to have both Medha and Resharp on the call today. They are part of the CloudBiz SME team, right? They are subject matter experts. Each of them come with, years and years of experience in the clinical research industry, right? They've both kind of worn all the different hats, if you will, that right in the entire clinical operations space, and they just have a wealth of knowledge. And we're super, super proud and excited to have them as part of our team, right, to help us internally, but also really be a value add for all of you here attending today, so you can learn from some of the best of the best. Right. So with that said, I'd like to pass the ball to Medha, who is the director of our clinical solutions operations here at CloudBiz. Medha, please go ahead.
Thank you, Roshan. So I hope everyone can hear me. Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. I am Medha Datar. I work as Director Clinical Solutions with CloudBiz and come with about 18 years of experience in the clinical research industry. I've worked with CROs, small biotech companies, sites, and have worked on projects starting from startup till closeout. So super excited to be here and share some of our knowledge with you guys. Thank you. And Rishabh, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Medha. My name is Resharp. I'm located in Toronto. I worked in the healthcare industry for about 15 years. Out of that, about 7 years was actually clinical practice. I'm an international medical graduate. And then about 8 years, I'm working in clinical trial industry. So I have managed various trials, and I've also managed various eTMFs in my past roles. So very excited to be sharing my knowledge here with you guys today. Thank you. Okay, we can, I think, move to the next slide. Yeah. Okay, so let's start. Let's discuss what is an eTMF. In simple terms, trial master file refers to a repository of documents for a clinical research study. A TMF, as it is called, should be set up at the beginning of a trial. The essential documents that make up this file should be kept in a secure but accessible manner. A well-kept TMF can help with efficient trial management and can facilitate the reconstruction of the conduct of a trial during an audit or during an inspection process. So talking about the definition, there is no specific definition of a TMF. ICH GCP, as we all know, defines essential documents. So these are the documents that individually and collectively permit the evaluation of the conduct of a study and the quality of the data produced. And section 8 or chapter 8 of the ICH GCP contains list of all the essential documents. And this trial master file basically contains or must contain all these essential documents. A TMF plays a key role in the successful management of a trial and is required by the investigators, or we can say by the sites as well as the sponsors. So what is the content of the TMF? It contains essential documents, as we just talked, like protocol, investigator brochure, informed consent forms. So those are essential documents, or essential documents related to sites like financial disclosure forms or an FDA 1572 for a drug study, all those essential documents. it must also contain superseded documents. Like if you have a protocol version 2 or a new clinical monitoring plan, it goes into the eTMF. The next thing is correspondence. Emails or any other relevant correspondence from regulatory authorities, IRBs, any independent committees, or even between the investigators and sponsors goes into the eTMF. Now, this correspondence can be filed into the TMF by creating a PDF of the email body. Also, attachment with emails need to be filed into the TMF. However, email attachment should also be uploaded separately under the appropriate document location. That applies if those attachments are standalone TMF documents in itself. And then we have file notes. Now, if there is a missing document that cannot be located, a note to file providing an explanation and appropriately signed must be placed in the associated folder. Please note that a note to file should only be used to clarify the documentation and is not a replacement of the document itself. Let's move to the next slide. Okay, so what are the benefits of an electronic TMF versus a paper-based TMF? So an electronic TMF is a TMF that is maintained electronically. Now, there is an increasing use of electronic TMFs instead of paper-based TMFs in the management of clinical trials. And the same controls, if not more, must be available for managing these electronic TMFs in terms of security, in terms of control over unauthorized access, or even ease of retrieval of documents. So the regulations and the guidelines, they do not differentiate between electronic TMF or a paper TMF. Therefore, all the basic requirements are same for both formats, or even when used in combination, known as hybrid TMF. The electronic TMFs should first and foremost enable appropriate security, ensuring that there is no loss, alteration, or corruption of data or documents. Also, it should be reliable and should have regular backup of its content. With paper-based TMFs, what happened was that the sites or any other stakeholders or even the sponsors were always concerned about the security of the trial master file, like how accessible are the documents? Are there any proper locks in place? What risks are there from unseen circumstances like water leaks or even fire or even pest infestation? All those circumstances could happen. With electronic eTMF, now you have user accounts, you have secure passwords for users, you have a system in place that protects individual documents or even the entire eTMF. The next feature is remote access. Traditionally, a paper TMF could only be accessed at one physical location. Documents were collected from all the sites by CRAs and then filed at one central location. With remote eTMF, you have access from virtually anywhere, and the amount of time and effort that is saved is massive with electronic TMFs. And the next is restricted access. Similar to what we discussed in security, even if you had locks to paper TMF, there was no way to control who can see what documents, as everyone in the study doesn't have same level of access. With electronic TMFs, there are role-based permissions, and you have something called event monitoring, where you can see who logged in and at what time and what was accessed. And you also have audit trails to know what changes were made as part of 21 CFR Part 11 compliance these days. Then we have the document search. Searching a document with paper-based TMF was basically a nightmare, particularly at the end of a trial when you had thousands of documents. With electronic TMFs, it can be done with a single click, or you can say with a simple search box where you type in the document that is needed and all the documents related to that name will appear. So it's as simple as that nowadays with electronic TMF. Electronic TMFs have also solved the problem of archiving and retention. With paper-based TMFs, you need physical space to archive and retain the TMFs. With electronic TMFs, it can be easily done through flash drives or electronic drives or even at secure data centers that certain organizations maintain. And the last benefit listed here is electronic investigator site file, or site binder as it is usually called. Electronic TMF eliminates the need for any physical binders. There is no need for a sponsor or for a CRO to print, assemble, and then ship physical binders to hundreds of sites. They just need to give access to specific electronic folder structure set up at the beginning of the study, and you are good to go. Let's go to the next slide. So for this slide, I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Medha.
Thank you, Rishabh. So now that we know the difference between a paper TMF and an electronic TMF, let's look at some of the core features that are required in an eTMF. Some of those have been addressed by Resharp already in the previous slides. So I will be touching at a very macro level on some of these items. So first of all, the most important feature, obviously, in an eTMF is automated and configurable metadata. So the platform or the solution that you're working with should have the ability to provide the research teams to view the document and the metadata side by side. And what this does is reduces the errors in metadata entry. And as we all know, metadata capturing for each document becomes very, very relevant for a lot of different items, such as running reports and accessing the health of your eTMF. The solution should have the ability to allow us to add custom metadata fields based on our individual company processes. It should allow for automatic generation of folder structures every time a new study is added, be it a DIA folder structure that you're going with or a customized folder structure. System should also allow us to auto-populate, not allow us, but the system should auto-populate some of the documents metadata to the maximum extent possible. So based on the available data that you have, such as the name of the document or the version number or the date, the system should auto-populate some of these metadata elements. Another important element, if your platform allows for it, is auto-naming of document whenever possible. So these automations and configurable metadata really help workflows and effective work processes. The other one that we need to look for is TMF reference models. So do we have the ability to customize our reference models, our folder structures, or also allow us to use DIA reference models? Are we able to remove and add folders after copying the standard built-in models? Are we able to remove and add folders as required per study? The next one we're looking at is access and permissions. So we need to ensure that the platform allows us the ability to control access to eTMF based on roles, user roles. So the monitor, for example, should have a different access and a view to the system as opposed to an auditor or a project manager, for example. So the system should be able to cater to all our different requirements. The access levels also need to be at the study level, at site level, and at individual user level. So the sites should be able to see or not see if they do not have access to eTMF. Similarly, a project manager should only be able to see the eTMF folders for their individual studies. Search, as Resharp mentioned, is another critical element when you're looking for a feature in eTMF. So the ability to search files, the ability to search based on document metadata, as well as the ability to set custom filters and set up your list views based on your individual requirements. The next one is approval workflows. So does the system allow us to route documents for review and approval with ease? Are we able to assign document statuses such as approved, flagged, discarded, etc. for each of the documents after the review process is completed? Are we able to send and receive notifications at each review process? And also the ability to customize the workflow based on the type and nature of a clinical research study. So not all studies have the same workflows. So the system should be able to generate notifications based on those. Another important feature is ability to upload documents. Drag and drop, obviously, is one of the most common ones, and your system should allow us to drag and drop documents into our eTMF. Does the eTMF solution or platform offer us a holding area, which is essentially a repository where all the documents are dumped before QC checks. And once the QC process is complete, the document is approved, then it gets uploaded to the destination folder. So again, some of the features that we should look for in an eTMF. The next one is audit trail. Obviously, I won't get into too much detail on audit trails. The short of it is we should be able to tell the story of how a document got to where it is and by whom. So audit trail is another important feature. Notifications we already spoke about. Timely notifications and notifications to user roles is also essential when we're setting up notifications. And reports and dashboards. So we don't just want pretty dashboards, we want dashboards that actually work for us and give us a view and help us assess the health of the eTMF. So setting up reports such as, based on the files, as well as certain metadata such as expiring documents, to be able to capture critical metrics such as quality, timeliness, completeness. All these criteria also becomes important when we're looking for reports and dashboards. And of course, last but not the least, is data security and integration. So make sure that when we are looking for an eTMF platform, we consider important factors such as data security. Is it a trusted platform? Levels of user access and permissions, how secure is your data when you're giving user permissions, and integration. So if you're already using an eTMF platform at the moment, and you're now looking for a new system, how easy is it to integrate? Does it have open APIs? The volume that it can contain, the storage, so on and so forth. So integration with other systems also becomes a very important aspect. Moving on to the next slide. Thank you, Bert. Back to Resharp.
Thank you, Medha. Let's talk a bit about the compliance requirements. The compliance or regulatory requirements depend on the jurisdiction where the trial is conducted. The universally accepted guidance is contained in the ICH GCP. The current version is called E6R2. As discussed, the Chapter 8 contains a list of essential documents, but please note that this is not an exhaustive list of the documents that are part of TMF and only contains a minimum set of essential documents required for the trial master file. Then there are a couple of directives in the European Union which define the laws, regulations, and administrative provisions relating to implementation of this GCP. Also, in addition to this directive, in April 2014, the European Parliament approved a regulation. It's a guidance. This is freely available on the EMA website and can be downloaded. There are two takeaways from this guidance. The first is that the TMF shall at all times contain the essential documents relating to that clinical trial. So basically, it should always be audit ready. And the second thing is the sponsor as well as the investigator shall archive the content of the clinical trial master file for at least 25 years after the end of the clinical trial. So that is a EU guideline. Moving on to US FDA, the US FDA recognizes the use of TMF as a significant piece of information, but unlike EU, there is no specific FDA regulation regarding the TMF. But since the US FDA required trials to be conducted in compliance with ICH GCP, there is an expectation that a trial master file will be created and maintained in accordance with those guidelines. Then there is an applicability of Title 21 of the Code of Federal Regulations. As we all know, Part 11, which deals with electronic records and signatures, and then Part 312 and Part 812, which contain guidelines and documents required for drug and device studies, respectively. Then also there's HIPAA, under which the clinical researchers have to make sure that no personal health information is filed or shared to a sponsored trial master file. Let's move to the next slide. Okay, so let's talk about TMF indices. A TMF index is a comprehensive and organized list of documents required for a trial. The requirement to maintain a TMF containing essential record was first documented in the ICH GCP. Since then, the trial sponsors, as well as the size, specifically the sponsors, they have all struggled to identify exactly what content the TMF should contain. As we talked, Section 8 contains a list of minimum requirement documents, but that is in no way a comprehensive list. There are documentation requirements that exist in various regulations across many regions around the world, but there was no single index or a single set of requirements that contains a list of all the documents. So a comprehensive reference model was certainly required. Then there was an industry group, which is known as Drug Information Association. So they decided to develop a standard content list for the TMF. And the first TMF reference model came out in 2010. Currently, these are the two reference models, the DIA and OASIS. that contain a pretty exhaustive list of documents, and DIA is by far most commonly and widely used reference model. So let's talk about a little bit about the DIA reference model and what value DIA reference model brings, and what are various variabilities across different type of studies. So the first important value is that it provides a standardization across the industry. The primary goal of the TMF index is to provide a single unified interpretation of the regulation through document listing, which would be accepted across the industry. Also, second thing is it also defines the required metadata for each type of documents. As discussed, metadata are the unique attributes of a document that basically make it easy for searching the document in a TMF, or that defines the specific characteristics of a file or a document in the TMF. Then it also provides a list of core and recommended documents, and also addresses the variability across various studies, such as drug and device studies. For example, for drug studies, you'd need a FDA 1572. For device studies, you need an investigator agreement. So all that features are covered in an index, specifically in a DIA reference model. Also, then it lists numerous folders and the documents required in a specific trial master file for a specific study. It's also known as artifacts and sub-artifacts, which are then organized into various levels, zones, and sections. Additionally, it also facilitates the segregation of documents based on your role on the trial, in addition to list of documents that are required for each milestone at study and site level. So let's take an example. For example, by site activation, one site activation, you must have the training documents of the site. You must have the credentials of the people on the delegation of authority log. You should have a delegation of authority log. You should have documentation supporting the product or investigational product or a study product or a device based on the type of the study. So these are the specific, these are the challenges that our TMF index solves and provides the standardization across the industry. Let's move to the next slide. Okay, I'm going to pass it over to Medha.
Thanks, Rishabh. All right, so now that we know what are some of the core features required and what are the compliance requirements, let's jump right into how do we choose the right eTMF vendor for us. Some of the important factors are listed on the slide here, the first and the most important one being cost. So when we talk about cost, we're not just talking about the final dollar value. We're talking about, are we being charged per study? Is it per user? Do we have any license fees? What are the setup costs? Are there any annual costs, recurring costs that we are looking at? What about support costs and reports? I know a lot of vendors out there charge a lot of money for customizing our reports. So those are some of the elements that we need to consider when we're looking at cost. The next one is ease of use, and ease of use and user interface are tied in together. So what do we mean by ease of use? Obviously, the user interface should be good enough. How easy is it to get our new users trained on the eTMF? The user manual that the vendor provides, is it comprehensive enough so that when you hand it over to new users, it's fairly intuitive and help us navigate through the eTMF? What sort of training is being provided by the vendor? That's another big one to consider when we are evaluating the eTMF vendor. Core features, if you get, 80 to 90% of the core features that we highlighted earlier, you're in a good place. If you get 100% of those, fantastic, you're running all the way to the bank. If you're at 50%, maybe you need to look and continue searching for more TMF vendors out there. Compliance, it should meet all the compliance requirements as highlighted in the previous slides by Rishabh. Collaboration with sites. So if there are sites that are using eISF, are we able to do integrations and collaborate with the sites to pull in all that data? How easy is it to collaborate with the sites and get all the data that we need, or documents that we need into our eTMF? The next one is implementation time, and that's a big one. How long is it going to take us to implement this? And what are we looking at when we add new studies? Is it very easy to set up new studies in the system? That has to be factored in when we are evaluating implementation time. Scalability is another big one. So don't look at your needs as of today. You should be considering what is coming up down the pipe through the next maybe 4 to 8 years, is a system capable of scaling up as per your requirements? So that's another big one. And one of the most often ones that we miss is the vendor quality. And when we mean by vendor quality, is we're talking about communication. How honest is the vendor in their communication? Response time to questions, even before you've signed the deal. How quickly are they responding to us? And the other big one is this vendor truly going to be a partner in your process journey, eTMF journey? That is an extremely critical factor when you should be evaluating a vendor, is how well you connect with the vendor, and is the vendor truly a partner in your journey? So these are some of the things that you should consider when you're choosing the eTMF vendor. And with that, we'll go to the next slide. And that brings us to the end of our webinar, and we'll open it up for questions.
Wow, that was fantastic. So thank you so much, Medha and Risha, for all the great information that you just shared with us. So, folks, hopefully this was a great value add for you. So we do have a couple of questions that have come in from our various attendees. So just give me one moment as I bring this up. All right. So what are the regulations or guidance around custom eTMF structures?
Okay, so I can take that, Dushyant. So there are no specific regulations around a custom eTMF structure. So you can use any custom eTMF structure. The requirement is basically that it should contain all the essential documents and all the documents that are required for the conduct of a trial. So that's one requirement, you can say. Other requirements, obviously, it also depends on the regulation that you are. As we discussed, US specifically, or FDA doesn't have those requirements, but EU is a little bit more stringent on that. So you can use DIA reference model as a base and then customize it based on the type of your study. For example, if you are not measuring pharmacokinetics in your study, you do not need a folder for bioanalytical report, right? So you can omit that and you can customize your folder structure based on the documents required. And this way you can actually avoid unnecessary folders as well. So there are no specific requirements as long as it meets ICH GCP as well as the other regulations as defined by EU and indirectly by some of Title 21 Code of Federal Regulations.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. All right, so we have a couple more questions here. What are the typical quality review items we should look for as we prepare study binders? And what are the common issues?
Okay, can you repeat the question again, Tushan?
Yep, you also see it in the Q&A, but it's basically, what are the typical quality review items we should look for as we prepare study binders, and what are the common issues in those?
Right. So the typical is, so first of all, when we prepare the study binders, we need to have a list of all the essential documents. So the quality reviews in there becomes is whether the documents are legible. That's one thing. Second thing, other important quality review becomes is whether all those documents are scanned properly. There is no missing information on those documents. Third thing is when we are preparing the study binders is the sequence of events, right? So as I talked about the milestones. So if there is a milestone, you should have the TMF ready at each point of time. So that's a very important quality review. The third thing is important, and most of the sites do not actually make that mistake, but you have to make sure there is no personal health information on those documents. Also, there are other small things like, for example, the dates are properly captured. Electronic signatures, if electronic signatures are there on the documents, you need to make sure that you have the record of that signature also filed in, and those electronic signatures, if those documents are going to FDA, are compliant with the 21 CFR Part 11. So those quality reviews are very important when you're preparing the study binders. And the most common issues actually becomes is the missing documents of one or two people on the delegation of authority log. So typically you will have documents of an investigator, but if a new sub-investigator is added, you don't have those documents there. So the certain missing documents is the most common issues that is found on the quality checks or the QC review checks of the TMF.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So we have another question. Is there any specific reason for storing the TMF documents for 25 years?
So this is a regulation, that's one. Why EU made this regulation is basically so that they can go back and refer to those documents. So as we all know, and there are lots of examples around the world, even, for example, you have safety data. I'm just giving an example there. Even after post-marketing studies, even after 5 and 10 years or 15 years, even 20 years, you certainly find certain findings and those medicines or those drugs are taken off the market. So the auditors need to refer, as well as the regulatory authorities need to refer to those documents of the phase 1 trial as an example, of the phase 2 trial. And they actually compare that safety data across that phase 2 trial and then phase 4 trial. So this process, as we all know, is a very long process and it could take up to 25 years. And that's what EU thinks. But generally 10 to 15 years is enough, but 25 years specifically is an EU requirement.
Great, great. That makes sense. So we have a question here. So it reads, we have a small study with just 1 to 2 sites. Does this study still require an eTMF?
Yeah, all studies, irrespective of their size, require an eTMF. Like we answered for another question, I mean, eTMF can be customized. It could be smaller. So if you have one site, you do not have site binders for each study, the number of documents required could be less, but eTMF is always required per the regulations. Yeah.
All right, thank you for that. Another question here. What is the difference between an eTMF and an eISF? Do these have to be separate systems?
So eTMF, it stands for, as we know, electronic trial master file. So it's a trial level documents. eISF is an investigator site file. It is typically replacing a site binder. It can be separate systems or it can be combined together where sponsors can provide access to specific site folders and that can be integrated into the eTMF. So again, it would also depend on the size of a study and how much time and money the sponsors want to invest. So if it is a big study, it makes more sense to have a separate eISF. But if it is 1 or 2 sites, smaller study, then within that TMF itself, the sites can be provided an access and it can serve as one system. The important point to note here is that the investigators can actually have access to the sponsor's TMF to specific folders, but it should not be other way around. Sponsor may not have access to the site specific, some of the site specific documents that are only accessible to the CRAs or someone who goes there and reviews those documents.
Got it. Thank you for that. So kind of building on that question, how much time and effort can we expect to save if we were to do an all digital eTMF and eISF, right? So how would those tools help us to be more efficient?
Right. And it actually saves a lot of time and effort. Specifically, I mean, these things have come to forefront after COVID. I mean, these things were always there before, but with COVID, you can always see those supply chain issues also. So if you have sites, just let me give you an example how efficient the process and how time saving it could become is. So if you have a study where you have sites in Germany, Spain, and then US and Canada, right? So you are a sponsor which is sitting in California, and then you have to ship those physical binders to Germany. It takes a lot of time, take a lot of efforts, and you can also lose those signed binders in transit, right? With electronic ISF, you have set up an electronic ISF at the beginning of the study, and you can provide a remote access to those sites, right? So it saves a lot of time. It becomes the process, it makes the process so much efficient. Same way when CRAs have to review those documents, some of the visits you can do is remotely. You can actually keep on making sure that you are reviewing those documents for the trial master file or for the ISF remotely. And that way your TMF is always ready. One point. Second thing is when they're actually visiting the site for monitoring visit, they don't spend that much of a time, right? They save a lot of time because they have already reviewed those documents. They have already reviewed those documents remotely. So I would say it could as much as like you can say 50% of the time and effort, or even more, depending on how efficient the process is the sponsor adopts and depending on the system.
And to jump in here, it's not just time and effort, it's also a huge amount of costs, right? Because as we all know, monitoring or monitor cost is the highest bucket of cost for any clinical trial. So the less the monitors are spending time reviewing all these things, the better it is.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you both, Medha and Rishabh. All right, so switching gears a little bit here, we have a question about integration. So essentially the question is it only integration, or is migration of eTMF folders and artifacts possible from one vendor to another? And if yes, what are the quality checks needed to be done in this process?
Okay, so yes. So first of all is the migration of eTMF from one vendor to other is possible, and it is actually quite commonly done. One kind of migration is from one vendor to other. The second thing is that the migration could also happen if you're just maintaining, for example, an electronic drive, and then you're transferring it to an actual TMF system or actual electronic TMF system. So the quality checks here, the first becomes is you have to make sure that you have a set TMF index that matches the previous vendor's TMF index. Or otherwise, if a sponsor decides to change the TMF index, then you have to match folder to folder to make sure the documents are transferred accordingly. The second thing that you have to do here is you have at the time of a startup, or at the time of this new TMF is set up, you have to make sure there is a complete audit of the TMF, which to ensure that there are no missing documents until that milestone or until at that time point in clinical trial. The third thing, which is very important, is metadata. Is the metadata being captured in a previous vendor or not? And if it is captured, what kind of metadata is captured? Because metadata is very important to know the attributes of a document and also to run a lot of reports. For example, documents expiring in 2 weeks. If it is not being captured in one vendor, then you have to manually look into each document here. Once you have those specific kind of metadata captured in a new system or even in an old system, then it makes the process a whole lot simpler. So to summarize, we can say that 3 kinds of quality checks. We can have the TMF index actual document checks, and then the third check would be of the metadata check.
Great. Yep. So it sounds like, Rishabh, that basically one of the main things to keep in mind is that both the source and the destination, they both should be matching in some way for your structure as well as for your metadata.
Right. Or we need to update accordingly and make sure that we account for those documents if we are adding any new folders or any new documents.
Fantastic. Now, the question also mentioned integration, right, as a possible avenue for this. Would that be possible as well?
Yeah, the integration is absolutely possible. So integration, again, is the data mapping where you match the folder structures, or even if you don't match the folder structures, the integration teams actually have a lot of ways where they can transfer the documents and metadata from one system to other, and it is also quite commonly done.
Got it. Got it. So as long as those APIs are available for doing that type of integration, then this is quite simple to do.
Absolutely, yeah.
Fantastic. All right. So another question. So both you and Medha, I believe, mentioned the TMF being inspection ready, right? So can we get a little bit more information about exactly what that means and how your eTMF can be inspection ready?
Right. So the inspection ready. So for example, if you look at a DIA reference model that is most commonly used, so it defines milestones for the study. So there are about 12 milestones that are defined in this DIA reference model. So for example, the first milestone is called the first regulatory approval. Now, any documents that you have obtained until that milestone should always be in the TMF. That is what it means. The TMF should be ready. By inspection ready, it means is that in case the inspection happens, you should have those documents reviewed, made sure that those documents are correct, as well as you have all the attributes or the metadata entered. That way, the TMF can be made inspection ready. And the DIA reference model actually lists what are those attributes of those documents, and the list of documents for each milestones also. So that is what it means.
Great. So now, how frequently can the TMF be, inspected? Would this be known kind of beforehand, or is it more of an ad hoc process, or does it depend?
No, it is defined in a TMF plan at the beginning of a study, the process that will be followed. And when inspectors or the auditors come for inspection, they actually see what kind of an eTMF plan you have and whether you are actually following it. And then obviously there are certain other methods that you can get over that inspection readiness in a mean that you can show them that we already have those documents available. You can show externally from a system, but you need to make sure that those documents are correct as per the regulatory requirements. That should always be there.
Got it. And what type of efficiencies having an electronic trial master file? What type of efficiencies do you gain from inspection standpoint versus having paper-based?
Right. So again, the automation is the most important part, right? So if, for example, I gave you an example of a milestone, right? So an electronic trial master file can automatically send you a report of missing documents or the documents that are already obtained, right? With the physical one, you have to keep on inspecting or reviewing it periodically. Some people, even when I used to maintain a TMF, I used to do it every week or every 10 days to make sure your TMF is always ready and you're not missing any documents. Because what happens is if you miss a document, it might be difficult to retrieve that document at a later time because monitors go at a specific time for the physical binders, right? With electronic, that process has become simpler because you can always retrieve those documents later from an electronic ISF. But initially, you always had to make sure every 7 days, 10 days. With eTMF, that process has simplified a lot. So you basically have a list of missing documents that you can send to a site or to a project manager. eTMF manager can easily make sure that your TMF is inspection ready.
Wow, that was fantastic. Thank you so much, Resharp. All right, one more question that we've gotten in here from the Q&A section is most of the vendors do not provide eTMF sub-artifacts to upload files. How can we mitigate this risk if it's present?
This is not necessarily a risk, if I can say so, because sub-artifacts is not a necessary requirement. Sub-artifact is more of a guideline, what kind of a document goes into a specific artifact. So for example, if you're talking about a monitoring visit, right? So it gives you an example of sub-artifacts. One is like a monitoring visit plan. Other documents that come with it is confirmation letter and follow-up letters. So that is more like a guideline that says that these documents should be in there, but it is not necessarily required. The risk, if there is, we can say minor risk is there, it is already mitigated in the DIA reference model, as this model has already labeled the documents as core and recommended. So some of the artifacts are core. So those documents you can certainly keep on asking again and again to the sites. The recommended artifacts or the sub-artifacts, which are documents inside those artifacts, is more as a guideline and can also be retrieved and are good to have kind of a thing.
Understood. That makes sense. So, obviously the Cloudbiz eTMF does give users the ability to have sub-artifacts, but Risha, what you're saying is that it's not necessarily a deal breaker, and any risk that you might have by not having it is already kind of mitigated by the DIA structure.
Right. Exactly.
All right. Fantastic. All right. So we just have a couple minutes here. So now I think let's close with this question, which I saved for the end, which are, and maybe both you and Medha can maybe have like an answer to this, but what are some of the best practices around privacy and security for documents stored in eTMF? We know how important that is, right? Going across your eTMF. So what are some of the best practices that you guys have encountered in your previous careers?
So if I can start with the most important thing, one is a role-based access that most eTMF or some eTMF systems are capable of, and if they are not, they should be capable of. So if you have a blinded or an unblinded role on a study for a privacy point of view, then you should be able to control access based on your role on the study. That's one for privacy. Other thing for privacy would come is having an individual access or individual login credentials for each user. There should never be a sharing of the logins, and also the amount and time, if possible, should be tracked for privacy and security, who is accessing that TMF and for how much amount of time. So that's another important point. And then for privacy, again, I would say audit trail is important. Coming to the security part, also you have to make sure that you have a backup of those documents, specifically the essential documents. The other documents which are non-essential may not have a backup, but for essential document, you should always have a backup. You should be able to also, for security, able to kind of download or zip those documents in against for having those backups again. That's another part of the security of your document. And again, having a great system or a good system which is more secure, having secure data centers and all those help in securing your electronic trial master file.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. All right, so one last question, which I will take, and then we can kind of close out here. What is the implementation time of the CloudBiz eTMF? That's difficult to say really without kind of knowing the requirements, but from my experience, I would say the median time is anywhere between 4 to 6 weeks from project kickoff all the way through to go live. So yeah, if you have questions about that, please feel free to reach out via LinkedIn or via email. Right, we'd be happy to answer any other questions coming from this session. So folks, I would like to thank everybody who joined. Once again, thank you so much for joining. Thank you for your time. Thank you for the fantastic questions. I think that really made it quite interactive there. So we appreciate everyone's time. Huge thank you to Rishav, Medha, and Bernadette, and Grace as well from the CloudBiz side of things. You guys have done a great job. So thank you so much. And we'll give everyone back about 15 minutes. So have a great day.